Okay, so I want to make a follow-up video to my R3 versus R6 video and talk this time about the R1 versus the R6 and the R3. So I guess as you may or may not know, the R6 and R3 are much closer in performance than the R6 is to the R1 for the simple reason that the R1 has about twice the power, the gearing is long compared to the R6, but not as much longer than the R6 as the R6 is compared to the R3. So I will tell you, having ridden the R6 a few times over the past 5 years, and the R3 likewise a few times over the past couple of years, the R1 more than a few times, maybe about 5 or 6 times over the past 5 years, that the new R1, the R1S, is probably the best bike in the R1 series by a significant margin because the throttling and the power band and the gearing and the handling and braking have all been significantly improved over the older R1. I certainly think it's almost a completely different bike. The old R1 had such poor power below 4K. It was really hard to ride slow, and you had to clutch, feather the clutch a lot, pull the clutch in a lot, and the clutch was fairly heavy on the old R1. Not so heavy on the new one. It's a much better bike to ride at normal road speeds, but it does bring significantly more power to the table than the R6 has. And even though the R6 is a slightly faster handling bike, the R1 is again better because it's significantly more comfortable to ride than the R6 is. R6 has very high pegs and fairly short and low bars, and you do get a lot of that leg tucked up under your butt kind of feel in the R6. But it does have an advantage when riding it on the open road, the R6 does, in that it is fast, but I would say moderately fast. It will go very fast fairly easily. There's no question about it. But it isn't going to be something that throws you off the back of the bike. You're really never going to have to worry about being tossed off it. And power-wise, I don't think there's any chance that you're going to have to worry about high-siding it, under just about any normal road conditions. And it's a much smoother and safer ride at, say, 5/10, than the R1 is. The R1 is not bad at these speeds, but it's not as benign as the R6 is. So if you're looking for a bike that's fast yet not overpowering, there's no question that the R6 is a good bike for that. The problem is you're paying about the same price for the R1 as you are for the R6, and at that point, that's where the R6 just doesn't make sense. It's much more of a bike for someone who wants to save money on insurance than anything else. The R1 is the bike you want to get if you're not so much worried about the insurance and you want a bike that you can grow into, that isn't overpowering, that does handle decently. I mean, it's no question it's heavier bike than the R6 is, but it's a real full-size sport bike, and it's something that I think a rider can grow into very easily. But I would definitely not really want to spend my money on an older R1. The new one is just so much better. So I think this kind of breaks down easily into 3 categories. The R3, which is really kind of benign, sport-looking bike, like a Pinto with racing stripes. The R6, which is much more like, an entry-level Mustang. And the R1, which is more like, the 302 Mustang with a decent set of tires on it and a decent suspensions. It's quite a decent bike, no question about it. Not the fastest leader bike you can buy, but it's definitely not slow. There's no question about it. And even at low speeds, you will find yourself having to ride it very carefully to keep that bike, 40, 50 miles an hour, because it will very easily get up in the 60, 70, 80 miles an hour in the street. But this is what I think is a big advantage of the newer bikes, the leader bikes over 600s. It's not so much that you need the extra performance at 30, 40, 50 miles an hour. There's no question about that, okay? Most of the inline 4-liter bikes will run through first gear at 90 to 100 miles an hour, and you can technically ride them all day long in first gear. True, okay, but most people won't do that. The big advantage is in riding them on the highway. There is no doubt that the performance advantage of a leader bike really shines on the highway when you start hitting some wind resistance and dealing with traffic and riding up and down hills. That is where a leader bike will just literally differentiate itself from the 600. Sure, the 600 can keep up with it if you work it hard enough, but you don't have to work a leader bike hard. They're so much easier to ride fast. So I think there's really little real world comparison between the two bikes, except for the insurance. I mean, if you bought an R3 first and you wanted to step up from there, I think you'd have to choose between a modest step up in the R6 and a significant step up in the R1. But if you bought the R6, you would be paying about the same amount of money for the R6 that you would pay for an R1, which doesn't make sense. And that's my real problem with it. And yeah, it's going to be okay, but you're not going to get your money's worth out of it unless you get a cheap R1, cheap used R6, which would be fine. There's nothing wrong with a 2005, 2010 R6. They're not much different than the new ones. But a 2005 or 2010 R1 is significantly different than the new ones. And I think that all along you're going to see here the price of the old R1 drop as people migrate up to the new one because they are just so much better. So again, you're paying the same amount of money for the two bikes, with the real performance difference being the R1 over the R6 and then the new R1 over the old R1. No question about it. Also, I would want to recommend that you take a look at my gearing, my tuning your bike and changing the gearing, because there's no question for both the R6 and the R1, you can shorten the gearing and get significant increases in acceleration at the higher RPMs for the R6 and just mind-boggling acceleration for the R1 all over the speed range, but you probably drop the speed down from 185 mile an hour top speed down to about 150 or 160 or something like that, which is more than enough speed for a street bike. Way more than enough speed for a street bike. And I just don't see how the R1 fails as a good purchase, especially the new one. The new R1S is a really good bike. The only thing, I could probably find some things about it that I don't like, marginally, but with a few tweaks, it would just be an awesome purchase. If you had to live with the old one or the R6, that could be done, but I would definitely want to get a used one that is $5,000 to $6,000 at the most. I would not want to pay more than about $6,000 for an R6, and I certainly wouldn't want to pay $10,000 or close to $12,000 or $13,000 for a used R1 that is almost as expensive as a new one. It just would make no sense whatsoever. No question, if you're going to get a used leader bike, get a Gixxer than an R1. It's a much better bike. R1 is no question, it's a sharp looking bike, but the Gixxer is better. The Gixxer 1000, in my complete honest opinion, is hands down a better bike than the old R1. In any of them, between the ones that weren't cross-playing before 2013 or whatever, 2008, and the ones that are cross-playing between 2008 and 2015, the GSXR 1000 is definitely a better bike than that. And you could buy, any year in there and it would be good. I haven't ridden the new one yet. I haven't seen much about it that I like so far. Honestly, I still think at this point, not having ridden the new Gixxer 1000, that the old one is probably better. But I could be wrong. And yes, it doesn't have the variable valve timing, but I doubt that's really worth the money and worth the new bike.